Explosions in Grozny, a military compound of the Chechen Ministry of Internal Affairs, was blown up right in the city center. The roof collapsed, the barracks are on fire, and there are detonations on the territory of the Akhmat-Sever regiment. Kadyrov is furious. A series of strikes and fires in Chechnya. A direct hit on Kadyrov's security infrastructure. All the details, right now.
Breaking news, friends. On November 28th, Grozny was shaken so hard at night that the entire power structure of Ramzan Kadyrov was put on alert. An Interior Ministry military base was blown up and barracks were damaged. The Akhmat-Sever regiment. A fire broke out on the grounds of the military compound. Several districts reported a series of explosions. Casualties, explosions, a drone attack, a powerful strike. Grozny came under a massive attack by Ukrainian drones. Ascent analysts geolocated the footage to the military compound. The roof collapsed on Kadyrov Avenue. One of the service buildings is on fire and the barracks have been damaged. Preliminarily, this is the location of the 291st Motorized Rifle Regiment, which is participating in the war against Ukraine. Local public channels report that 2 sites were hit at once. The Rosgvardia military compound in the Baisangurovsky district of Grozny and facilities in the Shatulsky district. This is not the first incident. Drones regularly break through Chechen air defenses, and now the strike hit the most heavily guarded part of the city, the infrastructure of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Rosgvardia. We will analyze each attack and discuss them with the President of the Assembly of the Peoples of the Caucasus, Ruslan Kutayev, right now.
There was an attack and a hit on the military Ministry of Defense, on the military base in Kankala, and this is very important, and there are S-400 and S-300 systems stationed there. The leadership of the Russian FSB for the Chechen Republic is located there. Their families, the Ministry of Defense, it's a separate military town. And this is essentially the command center over the Chechen Republic. We will wait with great hope that Budanov will send his envoys to Kankala as well. The Chechen Republic has always been militarized. It's packed with a huge number of units, all stacked on top of each other. And of course, they need to be hit as hard as possible. But still, everything should start with Kankala. Kankala needs to be hit so hard that nothing but a wet spot remains of it.
Islam Khamdish, last night there was a series of explosions in Grozny. A military unit of the Chechen Ministry of Internal Affairs was blown up and the roof of the barracks collapsed. This is all the work of the armed forces of Ukraine. Administrative buildings are on fire. Units of the Akhmat-Sever National Guard were hit. The explosions were heard in several districts of the city at once. This is one of the most painful attacks on Kadyrov's security forces during the entire period of the war. Greetings to you. What was blown up and how do you assess the scale of the strike on the Ministry of Internal Affairs military compound?
Dasha, hello to you. Yes, there is information that strikes were carried out on units in the city of Grozny and on National Guard units in the Shatoysky district in the village of Borzoy. This is the high mountain village of Borzoy. There are a lot of troops there. An entire brigade is stationed there. And finally, we see that Ukrainian drones, if you remember, before I used to say these strikes were coming from Mozdok and were FSB provocations. But today, I can say with enough certainty that these were Ukrainian drones that made it there. Why? Because there is no danger to the civilian population here. These are strikes against the armed forces, strikes against, let's say, soldiers, and against barracks, deployments, and buildings of the Ministry of Defense and the National Guard. And that's why I'm sure that these strikes were carried out by the Ukrainian side. A new chapter is opening now.
Sanfongich, how serious is this? What kind of damage is there for Ramzan Kadyrov, for the Ministry of Internal Affairs? How large scale was the strike according to the information you have as of today?
I do not have any information yet, at least for now, at this moment in time. I can confidently say that today or tomorrow, there will be fairly accurate data on who was killed. Who was hit? What matters most to me is that the civilian population was not harmed and civilian infrastructure was not damaged. And these strikes were carried out specifically against those forces that are currently opposing Ukraine. And that's why I think, first and foremost, this shows that Ukraine's capabilities are expanding. They are already starting to operate more broadly, more targeted. The fact that a strike was carried out in Borzoy, a mountain village, not exactly high in the mountains, but still a mountain settlement, also carries some symbolic significance.
If we now return to Grozny, how painful is this specifically for Ramzan Kadyrov, the strike on the Ministry of Internal Affairs? Can this be considered an attack on his power center and on his personal chain of command carried out by the armed forces of Ukraine?
Of course, without any doubt whatsoever, this clearly and unmistakably indicates that they were completely unable to protect or defend their own military units or forces. This very clearly shows that the war is now at this moment coming to this region, that the war is in fact arriving here. And it is causing harm to those people whom he has been seriously protecting, not letting them go to war. And now the war has come to their own home as well. This is very important from the point of view that they cannot be protected even while staying at home in their own units. From this perspective, it is highly significant.
How will the situation within Chechnya's security forces change after such a strike? Because seriously, the barracks were on fire, the roof collapsed, and there was a detonation on the territory of the Akhmat-Sever regiment.
Well, nothing will change here because no fewer dead are brought back from there, from the front lines, though there is a bit of a difference. In the vast majority of cases, these are people who were forced there against their will and sent forward. But here perhaps the significance lies with those people who last night. The people who attacked are those who are part of Kadyrov's troops. These are people he doesn't send to the front lines. People who ensure his safety, the security of his regime, the security of his power. From this perspective, of course, damage has been done, including reputational losses. I think now they will be reinforcing themselves specifically with missile defense and air defense systems, if that will be enough for them. With Kadyrov's resources, I think if such systems exist anywhere in Russia, he will definitely use them to protect his facilities. That includes his own home, his administrative team there, and also the mayor's offices. There are a lot of various high-profile people there. From their own point of view, they consider themselves, let's say, people of high status. That's their own opinion. And in order to highlight this image, let's say, and to provide this kind of status symbol, it needs to be secured. From this perspective, I think they will now make efforts to install power systems and similar ones.
And in general, this is not the first time. Drones regularly breach Chechnya's air defense, and now the strike has hit the most heavily guarded part of the city, the infrastructure of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the National Guard. Specifically, there were two targets: the National Guard military compound in the Baisangurovsky district of Grozny and a facility in the Chechnya'S district. According to residents, there were a huge number of explosions, a series of strikes, fires, and movement of equipment and vehicles. Shlankhamdevich, what does the Akhmat-Sever National Guard Regiment and the Motorized Rifle Regiment represent at this point in time? The floor is yours.
This is the National Guard, a unit of the National Guard, and it has its own specific features and differences. As we know, Zolotov heads the National Guard of the Russian Federation. Kadyrov and Zolotov are the closest pillars of support for Putin. These are two people who are very close to Putin and have his trust. And in the territory of the Chechen Republic, it was not Zolotov who formed these units, but exclusively Kadyrov. He selected the command staff and he can replace them. And this is very close to him. This is Kadyrov's army. This is Kadyrov's force. There are a lot of them. And that's precisely why I firmly believe that striking the National Guard in the Chechen Republic is, in essence, striking Kadyrov's personal army, which is under his direct control. This is a significant point, and it is important to understand because this means something substantial in the broader context.
Shlangmagnik, do you think this attack is some kind of signal to the Kremlin and personally to Putin, in your opinion, or is it a blow directed solely at Ramzan Kadyrov?
I think this will ultimately be painful not only for Kadyrov himself, but also for President Putin as well, because these units are among those that will be directly responsible for ensuring and maintaining Putin's personal security at the most critical moment in Moscow. They will be transferred to Moscow, not in traditional mountain attire, but in the uniforms of the National Guard. There are National Guard units, but these are the units that were formed, nurtured and raised by Kadyrov, and they will be especially close to him. That is, for example, along the perimeter of the Kremlin walls, it is precisely these most trusted people who will be there. Because Putin doesn't trust the FSB, nor the Russian community, nor Russian patriots, he trusts these people. And striking at them is the same as striking at Putin's security.
A very important point. Ramzan Kadyrov's private army has grown several times over since the start of Russia's large-scale invasion. This is reported by all open sources and opposition media. By how much and how many times has this army grown? And as of today, can it be considered Putin's private army? I'm interested in your analysis.
I think Kadyrov himself mentioned this number. Sometimes it was 50, sometimes 70,000. I don't think this is just a play on words. In fact, as the war has gained momentum, and indeed the war has intensified, not now, but there was a time during the surge in 2024, the biggest surge when Russia was trying to break through Ukraine's defenses. At that time, when they were recruiting people, I think Kadyrov kept half or a third, or even more than a third, for himself there. And this replenishment of his personal army is because those people whom he mobilized to send them to the front lines in Ukraine, to the Ukrainian front, he kept them for himself this way. But this is not his own improvisation. This is coordinated with Putin. This is Putin's understanding that his time will come when he will need to defend himself, his loved ones, his power in Moscow. And that's why Kadyrov's army has a special role and special significance in the life of the Russian authorities.
We have noticed that there are currently some migrant riots taking place in Moscow. Furthermore, the FSB is joining forces with the National Guard to attack accordingly migrants in major Russian cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. The arrests of migrants are being carried out jointly by the FSB and the National Guard. Taking into account the current marches of Russian nationalists, riots, and conflicts between war correspondents and Solovyov, for example, there are also veterans of the so-called special military operation, obviously. These terrorist killers are now also speaking out against Solovyov. It's a kind of snake pit situation. In your opinion, what is the current relationship between Kadyrov, the National Guard, and the FSB, given these kinds of turbulences at the center?
It's important to understand clearly that the FSB's influence over the National Guard in the region still remains, although there are still some conflicts there because the central office, the leadership of the Russian National Guard, they are in conflict. Despite all this, part of Russia's management structure apparently still remains intact. They have not yet started openly fighting or entering into direct conflict with each other, although the time will come when they will do that as well. And that's why I think it is primarily the FSB that is provoking these migrant disturbances, these acts of migrant disobedience. And how exactly? They persecute them. They persecute them not lawfully, but in order to agitate these migrants to send in the National Guard. And so that this conflict, why is this being done? To strip Moscow of its defenses? If there are conflicts in the regions and the National Guard is involved in these conflicts, then as a force for counteraction, or let's say for Putin's protection, they won't be available, they can't be deployed in Moscow. That's why the FSB, the Federal Security Service, creates various conflicts and disturbances in the regions to tie up and occupy the National Guard forces locally so they can't quickly come to Moscow's aid and protect President Putin. This is also directly related to the behavior of nationalists who stir up the regions, persecute non-Russian peoples, Muslims, in order to scatter all the National Guard forces so that they can't be mobilized and gather in Moscow to protect Putin.
Alexander Vladimirovich, we know that, in principle, European and American missiles are capable of striking Russian territory deep inside Russia. We've seen the Attack-MS strikes, which had a certain effect among Russian war correspondents and propagandists. We know that we now have ballistic drones. I'm not even afraid to use that term because today I heard for the first time the phrase not ballistic missiles, but ballistic drones are being prepared. This is still something of an exclusive, but today I read this information. Our missiles are drones Flamingo. Now, what can be said about security in the region, meaning Chechnya military facilities? How vulnerable is Grozny itself now, specifically in terms of law enforcement and military sites?
Ballistic drones are drones with rocket engines. This has indeed already been under development. Most likely they have already been launched. This isn't a motorcycle moving at 60 kilometers per hour for a whole day, trying to find ways to bypass missile and air defense systems. Here they can reach their targets quite seriously and at high speed. And the most interesting part is that the warhead is getting bigger. Delivering a strike, this is very important. In general, I want to remind our viewers that essentially drones consist of three parts. There's the airframe, the warhead, the optics for targeting, and the motor that actually carries all of this. And with the advent of rocket engines in drones, things are accelerating so much that you can have, well, at least long-range missiles, and let's say 1.5 tons or even more, though with a slightly smaller warhead. That's one thing. And these rocket-type drones are going to have a very serious impact. Now, as for how much this changes the situation, of course, it changes things. In general, the appearance of these new types, even just in terms of time, is significant. If the previous drone took a whole day to fly, this one does it in an hour. So the processes intensify, they speed up. If you could attempt to shoot at slow-moving drones with a machine gun, an automatic rifle, or a shotgun, maybe you would hit them, maybe not. But when it comes to those drones that are carrying rocket engines, excuse me, there really needs to be a special method to destroy them, to shoot them down. And that's why, firstly, efficiency increases in terms of the time it takes to deploy them. And the effectiveness also increases in terms of the safety of the raids carried out by these drones. And so I think this as well, along with other already existing, currently developing, and applied methods of delivering strikes on Russian territory, will also contribute to improving the situation.
Alexander Vladimirovich, you know Chechnya and its military facilities much better than many journalists and media representatives. Do you expect new attacks on security facilities in Chechnya? Absolutely, that's exactly what we're talking about. And in your opinion, which facilities are currently the most vulnerable?
I think so. In the best of times, there were always at least 100,000 servicemen stationed in the Chechen Republic. That is, the Chechen Republic, the Chechen people have always been in a kind of, let's say, under pressure. And the army was stationed there solely because of distrust toward the Chechens. If there were, say, 150,000 or 200,000 troops in the entire North Caucasus, then 100,000 of them were stationed exclusively in the Chechen Republic. That's why there are several divisions, 5 to 6 brigades, both the National Guard and the Ministry of Defense. We still haven't heard of any attacks or hits there. On the military ministries of defense, on the military base in Kankala. And that's very important. I think now they will start targeting Kankala. And there they have the S-400 and S-300 systems. The leadership of the FSB of Russia for the Chechen Republic is located there. Their families, the Ministry of Defense, it's a separate military town. And this is essentially the command center for the Chechen Republic. So we will wait. We will wait with great hope that Budanov will eventually send his envoys to Kankala as well. This is very important. And that's why the Chechen Republic is always militarized. It's packed with a huge number of units, all stacked on top of each other. And of course, they need to be hit as hard as possible. But still, it all needs to start with Kankala. With Kankala. Kankala needs to be hit so that nothing but a wet spot remains of it.
Dear viewers, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments about the strike in Grozny, and not just about our ballistic drones, but also about our new missiles, American and European missiles, and our partners' missiles that are flying deep into Russian territory. Friends, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dash Shaslivaya, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your location is very important to us. Shalkangich, another very important topic is how we are constantly attacking Russia, and we are attacking Moscow, the Moscow region. There's a series of blackouts near Moscow. We attack thermal power plants, we attack Chechnya'S, the oil port of Novorossiysk, the Caspian Novorossiysk. We destroy ships, large landing ships, for example. The attacks are ongoing and very serious. Moreover, there have been attacks on military airfields where, among other things, 295 MS nuclear bombers are stationed. All of these are events from just the past few days that we are discussing with you, including the attack on the oil refinery, including just last night, the Novokuybyshevsk oil refinery in the Samara region, the largest Rosneft plant in the region, was ablaze. Up to 10 explosions were reported. How do you assess the work of the drone forces, Magyar, the security service of Ukraine, and the armed forces of Ukraine? I've just listed for you, so to speak, what has happened and what has been burning on Russian territory over the past 5 or 6 days. I
want to say these are not the first strikes on the Novokuybyshevsk oil refinery. The roads have already been broken through, the paths have been laid. They already know. Indeed, Magyar is doing a great job. This is, without exaggeration, the most advanced drone army in the world. And this person, I want to remind our viewers, simply started from the trenches. He rose up from there. He's not some staff officer. He's someone who created, improved, and strengthened everything with his own hands. He created units, expanded them, and that's why he knows he's an expert. In this field, there is truly no one who is more highly qualified, both in terms of extensive experience and deep knowledge of drone development. And that is exactly why I want to say, this is my own assumption, but it is still based on common sense. They are deliberately not attacking yet. These thermal power plants, not until the cold really sets in. Not until there are real hard frosts. This could be done around New Year's when the frosts have already arrived. That's when these thermal power plants, whether they're boiler houses or a number of other facilities, need to be targeted. And I have not the slightest doubt that all these facilities are already known and accounted for. And the very best news, the Americans are transmitting detailed information to the Ukrainian side via satellite communication. They are advising on which roads have been laid, and for example, out of 28, out of 56, Witkov. I don't know whether it's Kirill Dmitriev or Putin or whoever. America continues to arm the Ukrainians with knowledge for attacks, for assaults on Russian targets. And that's why I think, and it's fair to expect, that the strikes will become more precise, more frequent, and more effective. Just as Russia does against the peaceful Ukrainian population, civilians. I want our viewers to understand this, and I want to emphasize it. Ukrainians attack only military and semi-military targets. Ukraine does not attack civilian targets. Ukraine does not attack schools, hospitals, or any other such places. There are no attacks on any of these. And that's why I think Ukraine will continue to improve its expertise in this area, and today they could be considered experts in any country, including the United States of America. They can explain and demonstrate how this can be done in the best possible way.
Khomdich himself, a very important point, yes, is how we are attacking the largest oil ports, including Novorossiysk, Tuapse, and of course Ust-Luga. And how do you assess the recent large-scale strikes carried out by the armed forces of Ukraine together with drone systems and special services?
This is very important. Ust-Luga is on the Baltic Sea. It is essentially used for transporting not only oil but also oil products. Novorossiysk accounts for 30% of all exported oil and oil products, which are shipped specifically from this port. And when and if we want to remind you, the transportation of oil products, these facilities are also being targeted. The transportation stations where these networks branch off in different directions are also being attacked. And from this perspective, this is a reasonable course of action, one that will ultimately lead to a situation where, even without sanctions, energy projects within Russia itself, which generate revenue for Russia's success, will stop functioning. At the very least, to throw its own people as cannon fodder onto the front lines in Ukraine, and this cannon fodder, so to speak, was supplying and funding with money. And from this point of view, the behavior is correct. It's structured and appropriate. I always say it's not Trump who imposes sanctions on Russia, it's Budanov. It's Budanov who announces the sanctions. He destroyed the servant, that's it, even if only for a few days. For a month, the port stops shipping oil, and so on. And that's why, Dasha, I think this is very important, it's very good, and it's very effective. It works, it brings results.
Another very important topic is the United States of America. This is the sharp conclusion of our material today. In the US, there's their own escalation. Just a few blocks from the White House, 2 National Guard soldiers ended up in critical condition after an armed attack. As I understand it, Trump wasn't in the city at the time, he wasn't in the White House, but all of this is primarily seen as attacks on the authorities. The suspect is an Afghan citizen. He has been detained. The Department of Homeland Security is implementing measures and suspending the processing of all requests for entry from Afghanistan. So the key point is that, so to speak, just steps away from the White House, there's yet another shootout, an alarming escalation. Trump has already made a statement calling what happened an act of violence and hatred and demanded a review of immigration policy. We will, of course, continue to monitor these developments. Shtamfomnik, how do you assess the situation? Because ever since Trump became president of the United States, there has been an enormous zone of turbulence there. Let's start with the fact that he was shot at even when he was running his election campaign. And now this kind of violence, protests, and so on. The floor is yours.
Look, Dasha, this is very important to understand. After all, today, the Afghans who are in the United States are Afghans who cooperated with the Americans. These are Afghans whom the Americans brought with them on planes to the United States. And that's why now when people say that some Afghans have come and are doing something there, they can't talk about it and have no right to. These are Afghans whom the Americans recruited back in Afghanistan, worked with them, and they took them out together with themselves. That's the first point. Second, these Afghans who worked for America, who worked for the Department of Defense, for the CIA, for other American intelligence agencies, who can prove to me now that this agent, an Afghan by nationality, who worked for American intelligence, didn't carry out this attack on the orders or at the instigation of some intelligence chief in order to change the agenda in America today. Because today, the existing established program of public behavior in the United States of America is not in Trump's favor. After all, Trump can't change the agenda on the Epstein list. He can't change what's happening now. They got caught because the list of 28 points was brought by the Russians. It was handed to them, and no matter how much they tried to protest and prove that it was their own creation, everything has already been proven, everyone knows. And in Congress and in the Senate, they tell Trump and his administration, no, the Russians gave you this cheat sheet and you named it. It should be said, in all fairness, that Rubio, the Secretary of State, openly stated that this was not the work of the administration of the President of the United States of America. And that's why Trump has a lot of problems. But these appointees of his, starting with Patel Gaber externally, all the intelligence agencies, the FBI, Patili, these people, as Americans say, random people who have nothing to do with these agencies at all. They were specifically put there so they would be easy to control. And they will do whatever Trump wants. But their authority, their generals' ranks, the height of their positions, does not help to convince the civilian public. The public of the United States of America, their effectiveness, the death of Charlie Kirk. In general, as Americans say, this is an open challenge to American society. Charlie Kirk is not just some outsider. He is the person who brought President Trump to power. This is the platform where Trump's children were introduced and where they presented themselves. And this person close to them is being killed publicly, deliberately, in order to send a message. By the way, it's a message to Trump. After all, they didn't want to shoot or kill Trump at that time. They were warning him, if you make a move, we'll just adjust our aim a little to the right and blow your brains out. You see, that's why Trump's behavior here is trying to change the behavior of society. It won't work. Just a few days ago, I watched your show where you showed how Americans took to the streets, how they protested, such a huge number of them. Just imagine, their numbers will keep growing. For example, the mayor of New York City, Mandani, was elected. Supposedly, Trump said, I'll crush him, I'll eat him alive. And what happened? When they met in Trump's office in the administration, Trump just sat there smiling at him. Yeah, like, go ahead, say I'm a fascist. He doesn't want to get into a conflict with him at all. Why? Because New York stands behind Mandani. Why? Because Trump got into a conflict with society. Instead of him, instead of this Mandani socialist, it could have been someone else. They would have elected that person too. It's not so much love for Montana as it is hatred for Trump, his circle, his party. That's why now, for example, even Marjorie has officially left. She's quit. After all, she was Trump's flag bearer. She was a Trumpist to the core. When he was no longer president, she continued to serve him. And she left him, walked away. This is a sign that the ship called Trump is sinking, going under. And he's trying to do anything he can to change the agenda. And I'll tell you one last thing about this. That's why they're trying to start a little war in Venezuela. In general, for our viewers to understand, in the United States, the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of the government is judged by the prices of gasoline and diesel. In other words, by the prices of petroleum products. If prices go up, the government is bad. It can't do its job. It doesn't protect the interests of Americans. If prices go down, it means this president is effective and should stay in office. Prices have gone up. Both Trump and his sponsors, those who brought him to power and controlled him, they want at all costs to occupy Venezuela, to install a government they can control, so that by summer, more precisely by summer, fall, September, or at least by August, fuel prices need to be significantly reduced. This is so that in the upcoming midterm elections, the Republicans don't lose both the Senate and the United States Congress. When we clearly understand the set parameters of the authorities' behavior, when we clearly understand what they are trying to do, and how to build our own behavioral strategy, then we know and keep track of them. And that's why Trump is losing and he's frantically searching for a way out. And in this state, he could do a lot of unpredictable things.
Slava Evgenievich, the Witkov tapes about how they made an agreement with Ushakov and Kirill Dmitriev on how to influence Trump, about how essentially Witkov was explaining how to manipulate Trump so that there would be no missiles for Ukraine. About how, as of today, Congress and the Republicans are furious and consider Witkov a traitor, a criminal guilty of treason, and in general, he is being accused of treason. But at the same time, Witkov will fly to Moscow next week as if nothing happened.
That's absolutely right. Many Americans in power in Congress have stated that Witkov committed a state crime. He essentially acted on behalf of a hostile state as a representative of an enemy country. He was instructing them on how to behave in order to deceive the president he serves, the president of the country of which he is a citizen and an employee of its administration one way or another. And that's why this is classified strictly as treason, as betrayal of the homeland. And that's why they got caught, because it has already been proven that what they are showing in English is actually a translation from Russian. There are even experts who have essentially identified who wrote it, the surname of this person, because by analyzing the handwriting in previous documents from different times and the style in which the document was composed, they were able to determine this as well. So from this point of view, it's good that today the whole world knows, including, no matter how Trump behaves, everyone knows. This is a document that Russia essentially took, put on the table in front of Trump and said, here you go, buddy, now say this is your document and get to work. That's it. It's all very simple here. And so with such a position, or rather with an understanding of this position, it will be difficult to defend and uphold it, and at the same time try to force Ukraine to capitulate. That's the first point. Second, Europe. Europe does not fully agree. I'm not trying to claim this right now, but at the very least, we know that both British and American newspapers published articles saying that the Ukrainian negotiating side even gave the green light to those 28 points. I don't know. I can't say for sure, but the fact is the press reported that it was specifically the Europeans who did not allow this to happen. So what does this indicate? It means that in Europe there are mature forces, and day by day they are becoming stronger. These are Germany, France, Britain, Poland, without a doubt. These, let's say, 4 or 5 players all feel equally united with Ukraine. They understand that if Ukraine loses, it means they have lost as well. That's really great. It's great for our position. Such understanding, such, let's say, deep understanding. And we know, literally just yesterday, they announced that Europe is allocating a very large sum to Ukraine, I think about 30 billion in allocated funds. That's the figure they mentioned. What does this tell us? There are allies who are getting stronger, even if at some stage Trump erratic, under pressure, being blackmailed. Even if something does happen, there are allies with whom Ukraine, all of us, will withstand this pressure and we will get through it. There's no need to throw ashes on our heads right now, by no means. This situation, well, excuse me, this isn't the beginning of 2024. It's a completely different situation. Right now, and I'll be honest, the circumstances are absolutely different.
Friends, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Together with the President of the Assembly of the Peoples of the Caucasus, we regularly appear on my YouTube channel to discuss current political and military events. Next week, Witkov will fly to Moscow and Shlangdichi and I will definitely discuss this situation. We'll meet the same day, record a stream, so friends, stay tuned. President of the Assembly of the Peoples of the Caucasus, Shlangdichi, thank you very much and see you next week.
All the best. Take care.